As Elizabeth said earlier, my name is Alex Schmidt. I'm Assistant Vice Chancellor of Campaigns and Strategic Engagement in the OVCIA. I didn't realize that I was going to be wearing a mic today, so now suddenly it made me feel very nervous. I'm very anxious about, that's not entirely true. What I do want to do, though, in advance is at least apologize and ask for your forgiveness, because I've been doing some form of this presentation in lots of different places over the course of the last 3 months. So I suspect that there will be elements of it that some of you have already heard. There will be pieces of it that none of you have heard. So as I'm going along, just again, if you're hearing parts that you've already heard me talk about, feel free to take a nap during that time period. I promise I won't be offended. But I just wanted to at least provide a fairly comprehensive approach to campaigns. And really it's to talk about two things. It's mostly about what is a campaign and what does that look like and what does it entail, and then to give more details about our campaign, right? So those are basically the two functions. But the way that I want to talk about it through this session is to talk about it from the standpoint of, so again, giving a description, a definition of what a campaign is, who the people are that are involved in the campaign, so we'll be talking a lot about that, partners, et cetera, and then thirdly, to talk about kind of the different stages of a campaign. They're not always cleanly chronological, but they're the elements that basically make up a campaign. What do we do whenever we're getting ready for it? What do we do when we're executing it? What comes after, okay? So those are the basic pieces of what I want to talk about. So we'll start first with, I guess that moves this, but not this, okay? Or not. Sorry, guys. I'm trying to get to my notes to make sure that okay. Looks like I'm winging it because I can't see the notes on the slide. Okay, but no problem. What are they? Why do we do them? What's the focus and our campaign? Okay. So I know. Sorry, Theo. I'm like making you come and stand up. It's not moving here on the screen as I'm presenting. So when we're talking about this concept of a campaign, and I do want this presentation to be relatively interactive. I don't want to stand up here and talk. Anybody have a general sense of what we think is a campaign? Sherry can't answer that, and I think she's not allowed to. So if I go back, yeah, it's not giving me that slide on the screen. Anyway, it's all right. No worries.
You're among friends.
What's that?
I said you're among friends.
It's okay. It's all right. I do know most of this fairly offhand. If it's just more making sure that I don't forget very specific pieces that I wanted to make sure that I got across, but we can deal with that. So basically, what we're talking about when we're doing a campaign is, for the most part, what you do is you take a time period and you say we're going to start counting stuff here, and we're going to end counting stuff here, and in the middle we're going to roll that all up, and we're going to call that a campaign. Okay? That it seems really elemental, but for the most part, that's really what we're talking about, right? There's not a lot of magic behind that. There's a lot more that goes into it. But for the most part, that's what you're doing. You're starting with time periods on either end, and we're saying, okay, we're going to just roll this all up, and we're going to call it a campaign. Now, the additional pieces that come with what makes that campaign is related to all of the messaging. It's the packaging, right? So how are we going to talk about ourselves during this roughly 7 to 8 year period? What are the messages that we're going to get across? What are we hoping to accomplish? Are we going to set different micro goals, right? Maybe total number of donors, we want to increase that. Maybe obviously we're going to have one major goal that we're trying to accomplish. But for the most part, when you're talking about a campaign, that's really what it is, right? It's just starting with this time period and saying, okay, this is where we're going to start, and this is how we're going to talk about ourselves. And we're going to tie our message of philanthropy to the vision of the institution. And that's what we're really going to hammer during that time period, okay? So, what's that? Okay. No, that's fine. See, I told you, once I put on the mic, like it's just the whole thing. Nice. What up, Tom? That's what I'm talking about. Give it up for Theo. That's good. Some of these numbers. Some of these numbers I probably wouldn't have been able to remember off the top of my head, so that's good. I want to make sure that I had that up there. So I think we do campaigns. Again, I'm going to ask, why do you think we do campaigns? What's the purpose? Ross?
Garner excitement.
Okay, sure. Generate buzz, right? Excitement.
Raise more money.
Raise more money. Okay, all right. Certainly you'd think that we would be doing that, if that would be at least part of the motivation for doing that. Anybody else?
Celebrate successes.
Celebrate successes. Okay. So, Bill.
That causes the units to look inward in terms of what their new or most immediate needs are.
Yeah. So, what I'm hearing is there's some planning involved there. There's messaging and kind of marketing. We're talking about specific fundraising. Rajiv, I know I saw your hand up there. What's that?
Build your brand.
Okay.
With people
Yep.
who know people.
Yep. Eva.
Make a concerted effort to quantify your success.
Nice. So being able to set specific metrics. So Tony says, raise more money. We say, what does that mean? What does that look like when we say raise more money, right? Yeah. Yeah, so I think all those reasons are exactly why we do them. I mean, I think if you were to package this in a certain way, I think you'd look at it, and we do it, I think, for two reasons, for external purposes, and then one reason internally, right? So externally, I think we start with the concept of legitimacy, right? Anybody who's studied business, organizational theory, anybody know what that concept of legitimacy means, what that is? So basically what that means is that when we look around, right, and when we don't know that we have a specific vision or goal for ourselves when it comes for a particular goal of any sort, right? Doesn't matter what it is. In our case, it may be raising more money, right? That's the goal. When we don't know what that is, we tend to look around at our peers and we say, what are they doing, right? Right? What's everybody else doing? And then for the most part, we all copy each other. I mean, that's what we do, right? And we tweak it and we do things like that. I don't mean to say that it copied wholesale, but for the most part, you say, oh, I'm going to copy what they do, right? So this concept of legitimacy, I think a lot of the reason why we do campaigns is because everybody does campaigns, right? I mean, I think that's one of the big reasons why we do it. So you look around and you say, okay, what's Michigan doing, right? Sherry can speak to that very well. Like what's Harvard doing? What's Stanford doing, right? I mean, you look at those things and you say, that's why we do them. And so if you think about what we do at the university, to even take it out of the fundraising environment, we compare ourselves academically as well, right? I mean, we're always saying we're ranked X. Our program is in the top 5 of this. Amongst our Big 10 peers, we're third. I mean, like whatever it is, we're constantly doing this comparison, right? And so this concept of legitimacy is one of the major drivers of why we do campaigns, right? So let me give you some numbers, right? So just in the middle of campaigns right now, Harvard, $6.5 billion, USC, $6 billion, UCLA, $4.2 billion, Michigan, $4 billion, Duke, $3.25 billion, Cal Berkeley, $3 billion, and then in the Big Ten, Wisconsin at 3.2, Ohio State at 2.5, right? So lots of people doing campaigns, right? And so if you think about our academic leaders, if you think about our foundation board leaders, et cetera, when they're trying to figure out things like what our goal is going to be, when we're trying to figure out about whether or not we're going to have a campaign, this is what they're looking at, right? At least one of the things, not all of the things. So legitimacy, one reason why we do it, right? I think the second one, which I know got mentioned, is this concept of building pride, right? I mean, that's part of the brand, it's part of the messaging, it's the excitement, it's the building of all of those things. A big part of why we do it is because it gives us a vehicle through which to tell our story, right? And in a really concentrated way, to be able to focus on it, for lack of a better term, to brag about ourselves a little bit, right? To be able to say, this is who we are, this is why you should support us in doing what we do, and this is what we'll do if you do support us, right? So building pride, right? Another one of those external reasons. But I think that internally, and I think Bill started to touch on this, right? Internally, the reason why we do them is because it creates alignment, right? It gives us a package within which to actually get on the same page with each other, right? And I know all of you come from very different units. I would say that over the course of the last 3 or 4 years, for the most part, how many of you knew what was happening in other units when it came to their fundraising goals, when it came to their priorities in terms of what they were raising money for, their metrics around what they were looking at in terms of raising money? Anybody? It's not an intentional calling out of anyone for that. It's just stating a point, right? I mean, we get very insularly focused, right? We look on the inside, and all we're worried about is what we're doing, right? Except that we're part of a much bigger institution, right? We are part of one team. And so what a campaign does is that it allows us to have these kinds of conversations, right? To get everybody in a room from varying different units to talk about what we're going to do. It gives us an opportunity to do better planning. It gives us an opportunity to set major goals comprehensively with each other. And it actually gives us the opportunity to get on the same page when it comes to what we're going to talk about, right? This marketing component. What are the major messages that we want to get across? How do we want to talk about ourselves? And so then when everyone is rowing in the same direction, then we get a lot more saturation, right, among our alumni, among our friends, right, about who we are and what we're trying to do. So I think those are the major reasons why we do them. So given everything that we've just talked about and some of those reasons, what would be your answer on what's the focus of a campaign? What are we most emphasizing in a campaign that might be different than we would during any other time that we're raising money?
Like uniformity?
What's that?
Uniformity, not uniformity, but like all being like identity shared.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I would argue that the biggest difference is marketing, right? I think that's the biggest difference in a campaign. That's different than what we would do normally. And I know that there's some fairly senior gift officers in the room and people who have led teams here. What is it, when you're actually talking to a donor or you go about doing the work of raising money with a donor, what changes from pre-campaign to in-campaign? And I'm looking at a couple of you in the room. Sherry.
I mean, for me, it's been that a sense of urgency because there's a goal and an endpoint, and a desire, an ability to draw on that donor's desire to be part of that success.
Yeah. Yep. Bill?
Took the words exactly.
Okay, yeah,
Sorry.
word for word.
Urgency
Just-
is exactly
yeah.
what I was thinking of.
Yeah. So what changes a little bit when we're doing that type of work is not so much necessarily that, we're suddenly not going to do major visits. We're not going to do one-on-one visits with donors anymore because now we're in a campaign, right? Or it suddenly doesn't mean that we're not going to be focused on our portfolios because we're in a campaign. And it suddenly doesn't mean, right? Those things that a gift officer in particular does from a fundraising perspective on a day-to-day basis doesn't change much. The messaging changes, right? How we talk about what we're doing changes, but not the actual work, right? The work that we do in that regard looks pretty much the same. Now, on my end, as someone who does predominantly things around the arena of dealing with 650,000 people, right? Then my work changes a little bit, but again, more around messaging than it does necessarily around what we do. We're still going to send out, for example, in annual giving, we're still going to send out solicitations. That's not going to change. We're going to do that the same way. We're just going to talk about the campaign in that context, right? So the focus of a campaign, right, it's not that it's magic from a fundraising standpoint, it's that the packaging around our fundraising is more focused on our marketing and our messaging, right? And Kristen, right, made the point that we're all hopefully talking about the same things with the same urgency, with the same consistency. And so that way, if a donor that a gift officer might be going to see has gotten an annual giving solicitation and they've also seen a commercial during the halftime of the Big Ten, then by the time that you go to see them, we're saying the same things, right? Now it's resonating, right? They understand much more about kind of what our basic messaging is. So then what about our campaign? For this one in particular, and Elizabeth mentioned this earlier, it's the first time that we've ever had a university-focused campaign. It's our fourth campaign overall, but typically what we've done is that we've done one major campaign for all three universities, and we've packaged that together. So it's Brilliant Futures, for example, was our most recent one, was UIS, USC, our campus, and all of us then had to fit under that brand, right, that packaging. So I ask you, what are some of the potential issues with that approach? given everything that we've talked about. Ross.
When people align with their university,
Okay.
instead of with the universal health system.
Okay. So which university you kind of already have some sort of basic connection to, attraction to, is already built in. Yeah. Okay.
There are different audiences that you're targeting,
Yeah.
whether or not it's community focused versus alumni focused versus kind of just.
Yeah. I mean, so just on the community basis alone, right? I mean, we're all in different communities, right? I mean, UIC's community in Chicago couldn't be more different than the Champaign community, right? I mean, it's just, it's kind of self-evident, right? So that alone, but then obviously who we're talking to is now, if we're all three of us are trying to get under one message, and we're all talking to these vastly disparate audiences, doesn't resonate as well, right? Nishant, you were going to say?
It offers less flexibility.
Yes.
It's very stringent, but the overall message is it's hard to get your point across through that message.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, Kristen.
Along the same lines, any goals or messaging you would have to accommodate all three would then have to be more generic, more watered down, less.
Yeah. Yeah, so we're actually going to get there in a little bit when we talk about even our university level marketing. But yeah, I mean, like imagine if what we're trying to do is have some sort of message and/or major brand that is something that all three of our universities can do. And our three universities are pretty different, right? Pretty distinct. Pretty tough to kind of to talk to the people who are interested in our specific university in a way that fits all three universities, right? So for this time, for the first time, we are doing three different universities, and in fact, we also have a system level, not a campaign, but at least from a marketing standpoint, something that is also going to be a separate brand that ties all three together, right? So we are trying this approach. We'll see how it goes, right? But I think on its face, it certainly makes a lot more sense. So here's the campaign timeline. So we started in 2014, fiscal year 15, with doing what we call this internal readiness phase, right? And so internal readiness is, I mean, seriously, it's exactly what it sounds like, right? I mean, we're basically everybody on the inside, senior leadership across the institutions, right, within advancement, are determining whether or not we're prepared to go to a campaign, right? And then we have what's called the quiet phase. Any reason why or any idea why it would be called the quiet phase? It's a really simple answer too, but
It's not public.
because it's not public, right? I mean, that's it. So the quiet phase doesn't mean that we all can't talk about it, right? It just means that it's not public yet, right? I mean, although when we say public, what do we think we mean by that? How public is public?
You're raising money for principals at that point, right?
Exactly.
The big gifts are happening.
At least some, right?
The marketing part is.
Yes. So during the quiet phase, right, we're already talking to some of our best donors, right, about the campaign to see if they're interested, to see if there's, if it's the right time for them, right time for us, right? So we're doing all of this already in the quiet phase. So it's more public than it might appear in the sense that it's not just internally held and being discussed. But I think it's a really good distinction to draw that from a marketing standpoint and from a messaging standpoint, it is very quiet. We aren't really talking about any of those things until we reach the public phase, which is when we launch the campaign. In the upper left-hand corner, you'll see what the three university launches are. So we have UIS is going first. We go 3 days later, and I think UIC's about 2 weeks, 15 days after us, right? So all of us launching all of our separate campaigns. I will say that, does it make anybody else nervous that we're launching in like 45 days? Because I'm glad at least a few people in the room.
It's going to be awesome.
It's going to be fantastic. I'm genuinely not nervous about that. But I'll tell you what has been difficult, I think, for this university in particular, although I think it's affected all three, is that we've had a lot of leadership change during this time period, right? During this internal readiness phase, during the quiet phase. So for us, obviously, we went from Dan Peterson to Ed Ewald to Barry Benson now, right, in a pretty short window of time. We went from Chancellor Wise, and now to Chancellor Jones, right? So we have this change at the top of the leadership. Jim Moore joined us at the very beginning stages of this process, so it wasn't like he came in. He didn't come in the middle. He was a big part of leading the entire thing. But either way, lots of things and lots of people that evolved and changed over that. So as a result, I would say Urbana got a fairly late start on getting ready for all of this, right? So if you see me as we're getting closer to that date and I look like a crazy person and like can't make eye contact, or you'll understand why it is, right? It's just because I'm freaking out at least a little bit about where we're going to go when we go public. All right, so then who are the people involved in this process? And I'm going to talk about the consultants as we talk about each stage, because I think it makes most sense to talk about them there. But obviously, our primary partner is UIF, right? I mean, the University of Illinois Foundation, they've led a pretty big part of the first stage, which gets around goal setting and sizing. That's been something that they have led almost from the outset. But we've also continued to partner with them on things related to marketing and all kinds of other things. So they're pretty much, we're same team on that one. There's always consultants, right? I mean, just everything we do, we're always going to hire a consultant, right? So we have consultants that are involved in every one of these different phases. The Marketing Advisory Council is a group of, I think, 8 to 10 individuals on campus who are focused on kind of keeping this university-wide perspective on marketing. And that's predominantly because we don't have a chief marketing officer on our campus, right? So we don't have a centralized marketing operation. And so what you're doing is drawing from, so Robin Kaler from Public Affairs is on the MAC, right? Bill Bell from Engineering is on the MAC, right? So we draw from all of these major places on campus that do marketing, and that's how we end up with this Marketing Advisory Council. But how many of you are aware of the brand change that's happening at the university level? Yeah, right? So moving away from the column I, right, on to the block I, well, that's a piece of what we had to make sure that we were timing and aligning with as well, right? We're really going to be the first users of the block I in any mass way, right? So we had to make sure that all of that was being done in a way that, so Eva's getting a little smile on her face. She's excited about that, I know. About making sure that we're in alignment with what's happening across the university as a whole. Creative Services, which is in Public Affairs, I know our unit partners in particular to help execute on some of these things. So when you have a need to design a web page or whenever you want to design a particular marketing piece and you don't have internal resources, maybe you don't want to hire an external consultant, Creative Services is going to have the ability to do whatever we need for the campaign as well with our brand. And then ultimately, I mean, the units, right? Fundraisers, communicators, et cetera. That's where the majority of the action happens, right? I mean, the day-to-day execution is happening at that level. So we couldn't do it without this particular group. Okay, so stage one. The first stage is setting the goal, okay? And Theo, I think we're ready for the handouts. I just wanted to make sure that. So what we start with whenever we're looking at a campaign, right, in terms of setting the goal, that's usually the most important thing is what's our goal going to be, right? How much money are we going to try to raise? So that got said across the room. We were talking about this concept of metrics, right? So we start first by doing a kind of donor-based capacity analysis. So we look at basically our entire donor base or donor alumni base, really, to determine like what our prospect pool looks like and whether or not we think not whether or not, how much money do we think we can raise given the prospect pool, okay? So right away we have two consultants that were involved in that process, right? So one group was called GGNA, and they did this really somewhat pre-campaign where they were the ones, at least, who started by scrubbing the entire database and giving capacity ratings, right, for each one of our donors for whom they felt like they had enough information to make that decision. So that's why when you go into TED and you look at someone's record, you can often see underneath it kind of an expected capacity of 25K to 99K or whatever that range is. Okay, so that's where it starts. You just do an analysis of the whole thing, the entire database. Then what March and Lundy did, right, they're our current campaign consultants. What they do is they take a deeper dive into that, and especially on a unit-by-unit basis. They take a deeper dive and they look at each unit's prospects. And they start to make a determination of what that unit's capacity is to raise money in the campaign, okay? So what you're looking at in front of you, though, is the next step of that, which is how do we project what we think that ultimate goal is going to be or how much money we can raise? And so if you look at, and the purpose of this isn't to look in detail at any one of these specific figures or numbers, but it is to generally give you a highlight of the process of what we look at. So the pink, orange, yellow, and green columns, right, those are basically different models, right? UIF has been doing the modeling for us, Tyler Fitch's team, if you don't know, and so he's been the group that's been looking at this. And so they say, right, so they're fairly self-evident, again, from the titles of each column, but they're looking at saying, okay, if you just kept raising money at the rate you've been raising money for the last few years, here's what we think you're going to raise in the campaign. They created a model, right, and I won't even pretend to know that I understand the model, but either way, they did create a model, right, around then projecting, based on the model, what do we think that you could raise. Then they have a projections based on pure pipeline, which what that means is how many planned asks does your unit have in the system, right, for a particular donor, and at what level, and they just add that all up, right? So that's projections based on purely what you say, right, we can raise money for, and then ultimately, if we mixed the pipeline and the model, that's the green, what would that look like, right? How much money could we raise? So if you look at then the column on the left, you'll see there's different elements there: campaign progress, reach backs, baseline projection. Let me talk a little bit about that. When we talk about what do we count in a campaign, during the campaign period, we pretty much count everything, right? So once we're in that quiet phase of the campaign, we're already counting every dollar that comes in the door is going to be part of the process of counting the grand total. I know there's a few exceptions to that. I think one of them has to do with deferred gifts. Sherry probably knows this very specifically. You have people under 65.
So for a deferred gift, a revocable deferred gift.
Revocable deferred gift, yep.
Where the donor can change it, the last member of the last member of the couple, if it's contingent, if it's the last second one to die, needs to be 65 by the end of the campaign.
Thank you.
So that's June 30th, 2022.
Yeah. So that's one of the biggest exceptions. There are a few others, but for the most part, it's pretty much everything. But then the question comes in when we say, what's this reach back gift? What does that mean, right? And so basically what that means is that as a university and working with the University of Illinois Foundation Board, we determined kind of a set of rules around what are we going to count that actually didn't come in during the campaign time period, but was kind of between campaigns. So like between the end of Brilliant Futures and the start of our With Illinois campaign. And so pretty much in that 2-year window, the only thing that we counted were gifts over $1 million. And then we pulled those into the campaign counting. So if you hear that terminology, now you know what that means, right? Basically, reach backs means looking back beyond the campaign period to see what we're gonna bring in to pull into counting, okay? And then we have this thing that we call this baseline projection, okay? And the baseline projection, what that means is that March and Lundy looks at that and they say, what do we think that are gifts that are going to come in that really aren't going to be affected by the fact that we're in a campaign, right? It's not going to really spike any giving of any sort. Basically, like, what do we think if we weren't in a campaign we would raise? So specifically, annual giving, right? Corporate giving is one of those. Foundation grants and givings from organizations, right? Organizational giving. So what that leaves you with then is this individual major gift and deferred giving, and that's what that next row is, and that's basically the number that we're playing with, right? So if you're a unit, we're saying, okay, this is what you had in terms of reach back gifts based on that rule, right? This is what we think you're gonna raise no matter what, if you were in a campaign or not. it's this major gift, individual major gift and deferred number is the one that we're saying you need to raise, right? And that's what's going to be the difference in terms of any one of these projections. So from there, what we do is, then if you look at the second page of that handout, what you do is that you develop a gift pyramid, right? And then all you're doing is looking at these projections, and you're saying, okay, in order for us to meet our goals, you roughly have to have gifts of this size, and we have to raise this many dollars from individuals in that kind of capacity rating, right, and in that giving, okay? Most pyramids at the end of a campaign don't look very much like what you thought they were going to look like at the beginning of a campaign, but nevertheless, as a planning process, we still go through that. So again, now if you hear this talking about campaign counting, and you hear this thing, someone use the term reach back, someone use the term baseline projection, if you hear someone talk about gift pyramids, this is what we're talking about, right? What you have in front of you. And then ultimately, and the thing I didn't give you is, and each of the units got this, is the third page then becomes an actual review donor by donor of that unit and how it matches up with the projections, both on the front page and then also on the pyramids, right? And so that's how we ultimately come to setting the unit goal, and then we roll all of that up, and that becomes the university goal. Yeah? Tony?
Alex, these are very specific numbers. Is this a mean of all units, or is it just a sample?
No, this is real, and it's real to a specific unit on our campus.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
So if I'm looking at this correctly, it looks like we're projecting that 71 gifts total will be coming in for this unit over the course of the campaign, or am I reading this table on the second page totally incorrect?
Yeah, no, I think your total number of households, that would be if that's based on the model.
Okay.
Right?
So the model, we're expecting 71 gifts.
Right, that's what we would expect to raise right through there. Yes. Yes. And if you have more specific questions about this and the process, I would certainly point you to Tyler and his team, because they're going to know, obviously, what makes up the model and all those kinds of things. So I can't really explain necessarily the numbers that go into all of this as much as I know that that's how it's being developed. And so, again, for purposes of the conversation, it was more to provide kind of an educational point information, just to make sure that you kind of understand what that process looks like. Any other questions on goal setting, how we go about setting the goal? Sherry, or comments?
May I just add a comment?
Yes, please.
So one of the things, back to the why we do campaigns, and some of it is to, I think it was Bill who said to focus and get specific on university priorities. When it comes to goal setting, there's the art and the science there, but think about, I don't know what unit this is, but let's say, when you talk to, Bill were to talk to his dean, or any CAO is talking to their dean, it could be fairly early in the campaign process, and that, like, if this unit said, well, the dean's like, well, our goal needs to be 50 million. Then that particular CAO, after the heart palpitations went down just a little bit, would have a way to say, okay, let's talk about that, because your aspirations may be 50 million, and we need to do our best to get close to those aspirations, but we may not be successful. The model showed we wouldn't be successful, so do we want to go public with a goal that we have a good chance of not meeting?
Yeah.
So it's that balance between, you don't want it to be a cakewalk, but it needs to be achievable.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, right? I mean, and I think that the combination of art and science, what you're looking at there is the science part, right? Certainly, and it helps with those conversations with leadership, because going back to some of the conversation that I talked about in terms of this legitimacy component, which is that more often than not, you might hear someone say, oh yeah, well, the College of Law at Florida, who I know that they're about to go into a campaign, their goal is at 100 million, right? So why isn't our goal going to be at least as good as them? Because we're a better law school than Florida is, right? I mean, I'm speaking like a dean right now, right? So it's absolutely true that having the numbers helps actually come to some kind of reasonable agreement as to what we think is an achievable goal for each one of our units. I know that I know that I see two CAOs in a room. Am I missing any across the? I mean, I know that the two of you, whether or not it's a reasonably achievable goal, probably is is debatable, right? Because I would imagine when you're on the hook for the number, certainly you want to make sure that that number is one that you think you can reach, right? I mean, because you're in some ways kind of individually tied to that. But I think certainly as the major gift staff is going to feel a lot of that same pressure, right? Because that's where this giving is going to come from. Yeah, Bill.
I also wanted to go back on your presentation. You had a slide that talked about the focus.
Yeah.
And one of the things I think is good for all of us to be thinking about too, campaigns are a time when you don't want anybody to not be involved if it's a good time for them. And what we need to be thinking also is how do we make sure that we have an opportunity for everybody to get involved regardless of what their priority might be, i.e. We need to be thinking about different ways to collaborate and to use kind of our different extensions through our friends over at the regional gifts table there, as well as per unit and multiple Illini households and degrees and things like that.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we're talking about setting the kind of the major goal, right? I mean, what that one big number is. For us, 99% certain that's going to be $2.25 billion for us as a university. I think if you were to add up all of the goals from all of the units, it probably wouldn't add up to 2.25. I think you're going to have some stretch amount in there that you're hoping a unit will raise more, or that there'll be other giving, like Bill said, that won't tie to a particular unit, that may tie to something else. But I think it's true, going back to something that Eva said earlier about the metrics, right? It's also about figuring out not just these $1 million donors, right? But what are we doing to make sure that every unit can be involved, that all of their donors and donor prospects can feel like they're a part of it, and how do we do that, whether it's via major leadership annual giving, whether it's through annual giving, right? Whether it's through engagement. So the focus of a campaign, again, isn't just about reaching the $2.25 billion goal, although that's certainly the most visible thing that sits out there. But internally, when we're talking about planning and meeting internal metrics, making sure that we're setting some of these other kinds of goals around what we hope to aspire to is really important. I think that's absolutely true. Yeah, Todd.
Do the units already have these?
Yes. Yes, I believe every unit has already had a meeting with Martin Lundy to talk about those figures. And again, that becomes a conversation, right? So when you're doing this donor by donor analysis, you're looking at it, and again, the model is looking at this kind of agnostically, and so then the unit is saying, oh, I know that you say that I can raise X much from that particular donor, but they're really upset with us right now, so I don't know that's going to happen, right? Or, yeah, it seems like their interest might be with us, but actually I think their interest is really more right now tied to a different unit, right? I mean, so it's all a conversation around what do we think that individual actually is interested in and wants to give. So yes, I mean, they have it. It's been part of the conversation in terms of setting the goal, yeah, for each unit.
Which unit is this?
I'm not telling you. I'm not telling you. That's why I blocked off this. In fact, I'm actually going to have you guys all give me those back whenever we're done. So what's that?
So they've got the projections based on pipeline 30 million on the first page, 30.35 million. They carry that over to the projections based on the pipeline projection mix, but they've got, okay, so they've got 7.7, but on the second page they're at 34. If the pipeline, okay, all right, I see where the difference is. They jacked up the 20 to 25 to 100.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just trying to figure.
It's all right. No, that's no problem at all. Like I said, I wouldn't probably dive too headfirst into making sure how all the numbers match, but it's mostly meant kind of as a comprehensive look at kind of what we do. Sherry, you were going to say something.
I would speak for Tyler Finch or Dan Biggs or Katie Harrell because they're like 572 times smarter than I am.
I'm just curious what.
But keep in mind, I think like pure pipeline, that's the outstanding and planned asks in TED with
Yep.
expected amounts and likelihoods and everything. So it's only as good as the data that's in there.
Absolutely.
Which is another just a little advertisement because I look at pipelines a lot, and I'm sure now that Alex is looking and Barry's looking and Susan's looking, is to just it's a little bit of an ad to make sure to periodically go in and look at your asks and see if your opportunities and see if they're right, because what we're thinking in terms of where we are with campaign and goal setting and everything, that's part of the picture. So
Yep.
anyway, that's another reminder why some things may look different, because we all know that our pipeline, our TED information at points in time past 4 now were probably pretty weak.
Yep. Well, and if you look at very specifically, individual major gift and deferred under the projections based on the model is 16.7 roughly, right? Projections based on pure pipeline are 3.3, right? It's a pretty significant difference. My guess is that this particular unit would want to go in and make sure that that's a fairly accurate 30.3, right? Because it is going to skew the data, and it's certainly going to skew the expectations, right? Because someone's going to look at it and say, leadership's going to look at it and say, well, in your pipeline, which you have put into the system, it says that you can raise 30 million, so why are you trying to get me to a goal of 20, right? So yes, absolutely crucial to make sure that the information that you have in the system is as accurate as it can be for purposes of counting. Okay, so the next stage, now it looks like I may have gone too long with the clicker, is marketing, right? And we talked a lot about this. I am not going to do the big thing that I do because most of you have already heard this, but I do at least want to talk about it in a more holistic way for those of you who haven't talked about it. So basically, what are we trying to do? First of all, we start with, again, who are our consulting partners, because we have had consulting partners in this process, right? So we partnered with 160/90, which is a marketing consulting company, pretty prevalent in the higher education space. A lot of the campaigns have used 160/90 as part of their marketing. So we worked with them to develop all kinds of things. Again, that was an iterative process, right? They gave us some things, we didn't like some things, we loved some other things, we tweaked some things, right? I mean, just like it does with anything else. And so we ultimately came kind of to this comprehensive space of how it is that we wanted to talk about ourselves and what we wanted to look like. We also, as I mentioned, we worked with that Marketing Advisory Council and Creative Services to make sure that the execution of our marketing could be done uniformly right across the campus. So what are we trying to do with marketing? And I think it was Rajiv who talked about this concept of brand, right? So the first thing we want to do is that we want to leverage brand equity, right? So we want to start with, how do people already know us? How do we meet people kind of where they are? For us, that was a big part of using the block I, right? I mean, the overwhelming amount of external brand equity, how do people identify us, recognize us, know us, is through that particular logo, which Angie has prominently on her polo shirt, right? The big block I, right? So even though we've had this column line, we've had it for 20 years, I think, roughly, maybe a little bit more, and it was something that I know internally we used a lot, but ultimately we wanted to leverage what kind of the public was going to recognize, right? So that's where, in the lower right-hand corner, you can see kind of the With Illinois logo, and that's what we were trying to capitalize on there. So Bill mentioned this concept again about this inclusivity, right? So we have to be inclusive in our marketing, and we have to have alignments, right, across how we're talking about these things. So I think it was Kristen who mentioned earlier this idea of, like, if we had to have done this kind of at a system level, our messaging has to get even that much more generic and general in order to be inclusive and in order for us to be aligned, right? Honestly, hard enough to do at a university level, especially one the size of our university, right? To make sure that FAA and engineering can kind of have the same general messages in a way that isn't coming into tension with one another, right? But either way, that was what we needed to do was at least create messaging points, tone words, something visual that every unit could kind of see themselves in, right? That they could look at it and say, yeah, I can work with that, and this is how I can uniquely talk about my unit using that message, using that tone, right? Using this design element. So that was a big part of it, because what you want, again, is alignment. We want all of us to be talking the same way, right? So do a quick perusal of different units' websites, for example, right now, and you're going to see all kinds of different design elements. The branding is going to be all over the place in terms of hierarchy, right? That's something that the university is working on itself. I was in the College of Education. I know at one point our color blue was like this kind of sky blue color, right, that we were using to kind of brand ourselves, right? So that's kind of what we're trying to get away from, right, is for one color, one palette, one blue, one orange, right? I mean, the block eye, all of these things where our external audiences are going to recognize Illinois, right, in all of us. But then in turn, you're going to be able to also be unique in the way that you talk about yourself in relation to the brand, okay? And then we created a guide from implementation. I mean, so we created a pretty robust, messaging and style guide. How many of you have seen it, at least? Because if you haven't, it's online now, I think. And it's basically just kind of a how-to booklet, right? It's an attempt to say, okay, if you want to be a part of the campaign, we'd highly encourage you to kind of follow the steps that are in this style guide, right? So that's kind of how we did that. So in the guide, and again, I'm not going to talk about this in detail, but what we did was we talked about the campaign brand. So like this concept of with Illinois. What does with Illinois mean? Anybody can give me the nutshell of why we chose with Illinois, if you've heard me talk about this before, what it means? It's going to be kind of important for us, right? For all of us to be able to do. Kayla, yes.
Well, if I remember right, it alludes back to something the chancellor said when he first came on campus, that you would go like a day or two without having something from Illinois, but you wouldn't want to have to go
Yeah.
a third day. So then now this is with Illinois, the world is a better place because we are here.
Yeah. I think that's exactly right. I mean, I think the idea is that if you bring to bear the Illinois family, right, and that's everything from all of us, faculty, staff, students, alumni, friends, et cetera. If you bring to bear onto any subject the Illinois family, right, with Illinois, the impact is exponential, right? That's basically what we're saying. What does she win, Theo? What do we got left over there? A pastry? Is that bran muffin? Oh, a bran muffin. That's nice. Yeah. I see that I got left with the dregs of the awards. Okay. Awesome. Thank you, Kayla. But yeah, so I mean, that's going to be important for all of us as we go into the campaign, is to have an understanding of like when we're doing our messaging is like, what are we trying to get across? And that's the major brand message, right? The major brand message that we're trying to get across is that with Illinois, the impossible becomes possible, right? In a nutshell. That's what we're really trying to talk about, right? In terms of creating content, what the guide has is what are our primary messages? What tone words are we going to be using? The idea that we want to take an approach of storytelling to everything that we do, right? What's the narrative? How are we trying to get this idea across, right? And then as part of that, it's a focus on the approach. Okay, and I do want to talk about this at least a little bit. The focus on the approach. Let me ask you all, and particularly the communicators in the room, I think, have had to deal with this. How often, when you're dealing with an academic leader, maybe sometimes even a CAO, and they want to do a marketing piece, how does that conversation start? I'm curious about where that conversation begins. Okay, right? I want to do a brochure. Why, right? Well, I want to talk about this.
People need to know.
I love it, right? Why? Because people need to know,
And
right?
if people only knew we were doing this, they would give money.
Yes, then they would give, right? So we start almost always, and this is true of lots and lots of places, we almost always start with the end product, right? The delivery piece, right? We need to create a website. I feel like I'm like digging in, into like the pain of some people in this room, right? I want to create a brochure, right? We need to do a one-pager on whatever, right? I mean, but you almost always start there, and then you try in some way to work your way backward to like the purpose, right? Why? So we're really trying to get everyone to think a little bit differently, right, about that process, right? So what might that look like? What would be maybe the first thing that you might ask yourself when you are creating a marketing piece? What would be a better way than starting with the end?
Who is this for?
Perfect. Who is our audience, right? Who are we? And not just the people. That doesn't count, right? Not just everyone, right? Who's the audience, right? Are we talking to our alumni audiences? Are we talking to our donor audiences? Are we talking to our community audiences? How engaged are they already with the institution? Have they done any giving to the institution? And if so, how much, right? Have they been coming to events? I mean, like, who are we talking to? Like, what, right? Who are we talking to? Right? Then what would be the second question?
What's the message?
Yes, right? Both. What are we trying to say to them, right? I mean, okay, so now that we know who they are, what's the message? What are we trying to say? What do we hope that this thing conveys to them, right? So like Sherry said, if they only knew what, right? If they only knew what, then what comes from there, right? So audience, message, right? And then how do we best deliver the message, right? Maybe that's not a brochure. Maybe that's not an event. Maybe that's not a web page, right? So you start with the audience, right? You start with what are we trying to tell them and why, right? Because that's another piece, I think. There always has to be some sort of call to action, right? A small one. It doesn't have to be give. It doesn't have to be attend. But we do want, whenever we're generating any type of message, we want there to be some results, right? We want there to be something that comes of it. Me giving this presentation, what I want to come of it is for all of you to be more educated on what campaigns look like, right? And to be able to talk about what the With Illinois campaign means, right? That's the call to action. That's why I'm doing all of this, right? I'm not saying I'm doing it well, right? But I'm saying that that's the purpose, right? That's where you start. You start with that, right? So I think that's where we're really trying to go with the marketing for all of the campaign is to even just change the way that we go about thinking about our messages. Start with audience and then end with the particular vehicle, the channel, the approach, right? Any other comments or questions about that in particular? Braden, you had a question that you asked me earlier. Would you mind asking it in front of everyone so that we can converse about it real quick?
Yeah, it was regarding the news that came out recently about removing the war chant from all sporting events, and I don't know if it was relevant or not, but I asked if the marketers and people were consulted, and consultants were consulted, if that was a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, the answer to that is no, that I'm aware of. It's very possible that, because those decisions get made far above my pay grade for sure, that they may have consulted with some sort of PR firm or marketing consultant or whatever, but from a campaign standpoint, no, that wasn't one of the things. And for the most part, I would say that at least 160/90 is probably never going to give us that kind of advice. They might, in a very casual way, say, yeah, maybe you shouldn't make any major changes of any sort during the campaign that might lead to this. But for the most part, no, that wasn't something that at least was discussed internally on the advancement side around it. But it's a good question. I wanted him to ask it just because, again, I just wanted to be able to build around the parameters of, like, when we're talking about marketing strategy, what are we talking about? And it is fairly more self-contained than some of these really big issues around, the chief, the war chants, right? All these other things that we know certainly affect our alumni base for better or for worse, right? Any other questions about this at all in terms of the brands, marketing, why we do marketing, how we're doing this, et cetera, et cetera? If you haven't seen them, these are the 4 messaging themes. This is the part of the talk that I give that I know everyone is really sick of hearing, so I'm not going to go through each one of them, right? But, basically what this lends itself to, if you think about this alignment with what we raise money for and what our messages are, finding solutions to the world's challenges lends itself really nicely to research, interdisciplinary research, breakthrough research, right? I'll skip to propelling bright minds. What do we think what would propelling bright minds lead to a nice message around raising money for what? Scholarships, faculty support, right? So the people-based elements of it. A university of distinction, that's kind of our legacy piece. It's this idea of, I think the way that most of us already talk about ourselves. I talk about all these rankings and all these big things, whipped cream in a can, right, which we saw earlier, right? What are these things that we've created that we're proud of? We already do that. I think the only thing that I would say is it would be nice if we could touch on the human element, right? Again, it's what I would call the so what. So it's great that, this new algorithm has been created that can analyze data and produce X. What does that mean, right? How does that translate to society? What's the impact, right? Why does it matter? Those are the kinds of things that we have to make sure that we're telling people, because if we then say we need you to invest in our data science, we have to be able to tell them why, right? Because if you do that, we can cure cancer, right? That's the end, right? And then a university at the heart of Illinois. This one's an interesting one because it was initially called For and by the People of Illinois. So let me ask, who do we think, given that, for and by the people of Illinois, who do we think our primary audience is there when we're talking about for and by the people of Illinois?
State government.
State government, right? Our legislators, right, almost predominantly. Unaffiliated taxpayers, I think, in the state would be probably the other one, right? Someone who's not a graduate of the university, who doesn't already have some other affinity, but is hearing all these messages about budgets and how much money we spend and all the waste at a university and all these kinds of things, for us to be able to talk about not only the impact that we have on the state of Illinois, right? So in terms of economic impact and technological impact and all these other things, innovation, but also the values, right? The values that we haven't lost a land grant, this idea of access, right? These are all things that we still are right at the heart of Illinois, our values and the impact on the state writ large. Yeah, Sean.
Do you think that your statement from and by the people of Illinois is alienating in a way?
That's why it's not up there. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's colloquial, right? It sounds really colloquial. Almost out of the chute, you're talking about international students and our international faculty, right? So they don't see themselves in that message at all. Our out-of-state students or faculty or staff who didn't graduate from Illinois suddenly don't see themselves in that either, right? I mean, so if you're having this kind of for and by the people of Illinois, it's why we tweaked it. Yes, Kristen.
Probably indirect, but I think it also kind of touches on that idea of like Midwestern hospitality. Like this.
Absolutely. Yep. I almost said Midwestern values, so that's exactly right. I mean, that's a big part of it too, getting that across as a university. So the tone words. So basically what this is how do we want people to recognize us? How do we want people to see us? How do we want to describe ourselves? What's the character, for lack of a better term, right? What are the personality characteristics of the university? So we want people to recognize or learn or just know, right? We want the people to know that we're ambitious, right? That we're ambitious in everything that we do. As I said before, when we set goals, we set big goals. We don't set small ones. We say we're going to cure cancer. We say we're going to cure world hunger, right? These are the things that we talk about at Illinois. Ambitious, big goals. We do those things courageously, right? We stand in the face of all kinds of adversity in order to meet those goals, right? And I have a much bigger speech around these things, but I'm trying to go quickly through them. Creativity, right? Everything we do creatively. We think outside of the box. We find partnerships that on its face don't look like they make sense, but we make them work, and that's what actually leads to the innovation that happens at Illinois, right? And that coupled with the curiosity, we're always asking the next question, right? We're never satisfied with what we have now. We're always thinking about what's next, what else could we do? How could we do this in a better way? Human-centered, right? Again, that goes back to the thing I mentioned earlier, this idea of focusing on humanity. So what? How does any of this matter if it doesn't help a person or help humanity or society, right? That's why we do what we do, right? And then we do it passionately, with determination, with single-mindedness, right? We pursue all of these things. And then finally, the last stage is launch, right? And really for me, at this point, Q&A, whatever you guys have questions around or whatever when it comes to this, I don't need to go into detail about it. Only to say that October 13th, we're having a major launch, right? We're having different events. We have a signature event at State Farm Center. We're having different unit events during the day. Yeah, Ross.
Well, can you just talk a bit about what the other universities are doing and how it might all, even though we're doing separate campaigns, how there might be some sort of, because I think about an engineering alum who has a degree from UIC.
Yep. Yep.
How are we, they're going to get messaging both.
They are going to get messaging from both, yep.
We're still one, but we're doing these two different
Yeah. That's honestly, Ross, I don't think we have an answer to that. I mean, you're absolutely right about, especially in Chicago, because UIC obviously is going to have a big presence there, and they're going to be messaging a lot of things, and their theme is around kind of I won't give it away, but it's just kind of around the flames, and so it doesn't look very much the same as ours, right? I mean, it definitely looks pretty distinct, although universities already have different colors and different logos and different, right? So there's already some of that happening. But yeah, I mean, I think they're definitely going to be hearing an engineering alum, or any alum really, who's in Chicago, who maybe has degrees of both, or for that matter, who only has a degree from Illinois, right, is still going to be seeing UIC marketing in Chicago, right? So how do we draw that distinction? And I think it's going to look different enough that that's how they're going to know those differences. But I think the system-wide campaign is meant to try to draw those things together, right? To be talking about how when you add up these three distinct and great universities, when you package them together into the system, again, the impact is exponential, right? In all of these different areas. But it's a great question. I'm not sure that we have a great answer for it, as you can tell, right? So,
Kind of
yes.
on those wheels, can you share their kind of brand themes? I think one is Ignite.
Yes.
Something around that.
Yes.
Just so we're aware.
Yep. So I think Ignite is going to be UIC. That's not public. So like us, we want to make sure that we're keeping that. And Springfield's is. Do you know, Sherry?
I do. And Reaching Stellar.
Reaching Stellar. Okay.
So they're
the Prairie Stars, right?
Stars and
Yeah.
I was like, wow.
Yeah.
Stellar.
Yeah. So Reaching
And all
Stellar.
those, they worked with the same firm, that 160/90, to help do the research around.
Yep.
And Ignite is sort of what they are in Chicago and what they do for their population of
Yep.
students.
Whose? If it is, then that's changed.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think it's Ignite. So yes, isn't it Spark of the Future?
Okay.
So I think probably what they did is in their marketing, they didn't want to give away their logo, so they were teasing it, which is why they use Spark of the
For
Future.
their campaign launch
Yeah, yeah.
materials that.
Because I got an email from them last week, and I was like, oh, sorry, that's not bad.
Yeah, no. So I think it's what we did in some of our early pieces where we said things like together, right? All of us X, right? I mean, it's teasing this kind of with concept. We finally just plastered it on the front for the last invitation, right? We said with Illinois, but yeah.
During a quiet phase, I know you're collecting data and also talking to donors about what they potentially could do. So that way, when you actually get to the launch date, well, we know we have 40% secured, so we know we're going to be successful.
Yeah. Yep.
Do we know what that number is or percentage that we're actually at before?
I think we are on pace, and I think we're keeping our fingers crossed that we'll be at $1 billion come October 13th. So I don't know what that percentage is of 2.25, but it's obviously less than 50, but not much less than 50. So
Being around 40, 45 is great.
Yeah.
I mean, that's.
yeah,
It used to be, they said you wanted to be, what was it, 25 to 30%. I mean, in my career doing campaigns, it went from 25% to 40%. I mean, it's because so much can happen in those last 5 years of a campaign.
yeah,
Economically, institutionally.
yeah. But it's also indicative of, I guess, to some degree, the importance of the quiet phase, right? And when you're going to those best donors to make sure that they're committed to the campaign, because if they're saying, I'm not interested, you probably shouldn't launch, right? I mean, so that's a big piece of that. Yeah. Any other questions about anything related to, yeah, Todd?
So going back to the tone words, I noticed that I actually hadn't heard this presentation before.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
I feel badly about that.
Humble, like, the whole shucks, maybe.
Yeah, yeah.
Has it disappeared finally, or?
Yes, we hope so. We hope so. I mean, so that's actually so funny because I almost didn't. That's actually why I didn't use the phrase Midwestern values when I was talking about the University at the Heart of Illinois, only because I think that often gets translated into this sense of humility. And I think you can be humble, right? And at the same time still acknowledge your greatness. I don't think that there's, or maybe this sense of legacy, right? So I don't think that we're trying to go about this in any type of arrogant way, right, or in a bragging way. But I think we've all experienced, I think, being somewhere where we're talking about our respective universities, where you feel like people just don't know, right, about what has happened at this university, right? I've had conversations with people, and it's like talking about other Big Ten universities, and it's like, oh, Illinois and Iowa, right? They're roughly just like, no, right? No offense to Iowa, right? But I think that's been a big part of it, is because we haven't really done this. Certainly not in a consistent and coherent way. I think all of the respective units have gone about talking about themselves, I think, in some of that way. But I think we need to put a big umbrella over that and say that's Illinois, right? I mean, all this, right? Everything that we've done is Illinois. So yeah, I think we're throwing that out the door, right? You're going to see that, I think, in our marketing messages, the assertions that we're going to make, right, about the things we do here. I mean, we're not taking the aw shucks approach. Yes.
And you and I have talked about this too. What's so funny about the history and the origin of that language is that it was very 19th century, like Jane Austen, and so we would always be when you see the so when we would say from the very beginning we were humble. It was actually the speeches were it is with great humility, which was the opposite.
Right, of what was happening in that moment, right?
Without any humility.
The humble brag, right?
Whatsoever.
Yeah.
You go back and in the archives, you can read excerpts from the original dedication, and also the dedication of Lincoln Hall kind of sticks in my mind as well. And that language is so far away from humility. I mean, what they're saying is they're talking about access and inclusivity, but that's a long way from, but we are humble. We should be great stewards of this, and it should be open to all. But it was with great humility, the opposite, great pride. So it's cool. It's cool to see that kind of cycle out.
Yeah. So to Elizabeth's point, and I was not just texting someone while she was talking. I was actually looking for a quote, because I think this really, this hammers this point home, and I think you're going to hear it in our campaign video, et cetera. But it's a quote from John Milton Gregory, right, at the inauguration of the university. And I don't know if you've heard this quote before, but it's incredible. It is no ordinary work which we are set to do, and it comes to us under no ordinary circumstances. We are not here to reproduce, in this new locality, some old and well-known style of college or university. The hungry eyes of toiling millions are turned, with mingled hope and fear, upon us, to see what new and better solution we can possibly offer of the great problems on which their well-being and destiny depend. That's 1867, right? I think we've lived up to that, right? I think we've lived up to that and then some, and I think it's okay for us to say that we have, right? That is who we've been from the beginning, right? And we just stopped talking that way, right? And that's, to some degree, I think that's probably okay, but that's still really powerful stuff, right? Yes?
I think you've mentioned this at previous presentations, but I just want a reminder on the numbers. You were talking about the percentage of donors that give what percentage of money.
Oh, yeah.
Climbs to 1955.
I think it's pretty darn close. If it isn't exactly that, I think you're pretty close. So, I think the old rule was this kind of 80-20 rule, right? And I think for a long time, what is it, the Pareto principle? Is that what that's called, I think? Which is mathematical, right? It's not, and so you're like the trivia person, Antonio. You've been killing it. So me saying that and you confirming it means that I was right. I feel good about that, right? So thank you. So it's so this idea is that's kind of the distribution, is you're going to get kind of this 80-20. That has gradually climbed, and it was, then it was 90-10, right? Yeah, you're probably. I think and Sherry, tell me if you might know this too. I think in Brilliant Futures, it was something close to, I think, less than 50 households or something that made up the overwhelming amount of the goal of the campaign, right? So yeah, it's...
it's that way in every campaign,
Yep.
right?
Yep. Yeah, we're no different. This is an industry standard, right? It's not...
And it makes mathematical sense.
Right.
And it's, so at tell me if I'm wrong on this, but, I mean, first of all, we want everybody who has any connection or cares the least bit about what we do and has, some money in their bank account to do something, right? And so we're hoping to elevate that participation and get people more engaged and caring to hear about what we're doing so that they'll give, and when they can't give more, they'll give more. The success of reaching that $2.25 billion goal rests on major gifts.
Yeah.
Largely on 7-figure gifts.
Right.
And higher, and that's just the way it is. And, I've been involved with groups of volunteers. The other group that kind of pushes you were talking about
Yes.
university leaders who, if your counterpart in another university has a $3 billion goal, you want to have at least a $3 billion goal, whether you really should or not. So they're pushing you. And volunteers push you, and sometimes being able to say, okay, so if our goal were $500 million, now we talk in billions of dollars, it's crazy. So if it's $500 million more, then we need this many more gifts above 50 million.
Right.
You're the leaders among our volunteers. You would have to be prepared, some of you, to raise your giving to that, which that's the reality.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And that's certainly the consequence or the connection to raising goals, or to having this 95-5 distribution. That's where it happens. That's where it happens, right? Exactly.
Gift space are a little tense.
Yeah. Anything else? As far as next steps, right? We're going to have marketing deliverables. The campaign resources are up already, so if you go to, I think it's go.illinois.edu/campaign resources, you'll get to the logos and I think different ads and obviously the style guide is going to be up there. We're going to have a campaign website that'll launch at the basically mid-October, October 14th, with .illinois.edu, right? So that'll be that. Videos, digital ads, digital signage, print ads. The whole thing. That's all coming in terms of marketing. For unit support, I think we're going to be working on creating templates that everyone can use. So hopefully major gift templates. That again, none of it is prescriptive. You can use it if you want to, if it's helpful. But trying to offer as much support as we can. Stewardship communications. So templates around those, so that we can build some consistency. Campaign landing pages, that kind of stuff. So, and then ultimately reporting. You'll see some new reports up on TED eventually that'll be tracking campaign progress. So it'll track revenue, pyramids, all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of what happens in the future. And then hopefully in 5 years, whenever we hit our goal, maybe sooner than that, but at the end of the whole thing, whenever it ends, we'll have a big celebration that will look much like this year. Probably with a lot more emphasis on donor recognition, kind of as that part of the end of the campaign. So. Yes, please. Yes. All right. Thank you all. Appreciate it. Absolutely.
All right, well, thank you so much for presenting. That's great news. Thanks for being available to do this, last minute, so it means a lot. We'll go ahead and take a quick break before All right, well, thanks, guys. I appreciate you coming back in from the break for our second presenter today. And Alex, once again, thank you for presenting on the campaign update and everything. That was really great information. Really appreciate it. So now I'll go ahead and turn it over to our second presenter, Sherry Fox, Senior Vice President for Principal Gifts, Gift Planning, and Trust Services with the Foundation. Sherry's going to present on collaboration and cultivation solicitation. So Sherry, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, Alex is a tough act to follow, so he's a really good presenter. So I think we were lucky to hear from him earlier. But I also have to thank him and a couple of you who brought up some points in the Q&A that were like perfect lead-ins. So Alex, please do have that bran muffin, because from me, you earned it. Because there were some comments and questions about, there was the point that maybe when we're talking with donors about a campaign, or when we're looking at who's in those portfolios by unit, that, oh yeah, he shows up because he did a memorial gift one time to ACES, but his real interest is in vet med. Or what happens when we might have somebody who has 1 degree from Urbana and another degree from UIC, and is getting stuff from both of us in the same time periods. So what great lead-ins to talk a little bit about collaboration. So I don't know if any of you have ever been through these trainings, these major, there was a series of major gift officer training years ago where we all got buttons that said, it's not about me. And I think that's something that we all know working in advancement, but we're gonna, just a reminder, this is all about, it's when we're helping this campaign be successful, we can do our jobs best when we take advantage of this incredible network and the many people who are either on the road behind us right now or in their offices behind us right now. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. So how many of you are familiar with the University of Illinois Development Community values? The advancement community values. Okay, good, most of you. Well, hopefully, those of you who are newer as you're onboarding, you will hear these more. But a group of folks from the advancement community across the system, so across all 3 universities and the foundation, came together about 3 years ago to develop this set of what are the values that should drive everything we do. And so today we're going to focus on the collaboration value, on embracing collaboration. That should be all 5 of these should really be at the center of how we do our work. So we're going to talk about collaboration, specifically in the cultivation space. So when I was putting together this presentation, I thought, let's look at what some definitions of collaboration are. And if you look in dictionaries, you will find things like this. First of all, it's an intransitive verb. Collaboration is an intransitive verb. I had to go back to thinking about high school English to remember what that meant, right? But here are some definitions: to work jointly with others or together, especially in an intellectual endeavor. Well, our faculty do that all the time, right? As do our students. To cooperate with or willingly assist an enemy of one's country, and especially an occupying force, collaborating with the enemy. I really, that one kind of sat me down because I thought, I never think of collaboration as a negative, but I guess that's one. Or to cooperate with an agency or instrumentality with which one is not immediately connected. And then here were some examples, positive and negative. So this was Merriam-Webster. Is that the best we can do? Does that really describe collaboration as we're thinking about it? How would you describe collaboration? How would some of you describe collaboration? Sure, Kristen.
I think about it as a way to maximize everyone's expertise, bring the collective knowledge outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. Maximizing everyone's expertise, leveraging what each of us brings to the table for what?
To create a higher impact than
I think it's a great definition. So here are some that I found along those lines. A man named Michael Schrage describes it this way: collaboration describes a process of value creation that our traditional structures of communication and teamwork can't achieve. So thinking about Alex's comment early on that, how many of us, if you're in one unit, could talk about another unit's priorities? How much of your communication in a daily basis takes you out of your particular areas of responsibility? This is a book that I probably should take a closer look at. The Culture of Collaboration, Evan Rosen says, working together to create value while sharing virtual and physical space. It certainly plays into today's. But here was my favorite one. Cut to the chase. 2 or more people working together toward shared goals. That's what collaboration is, right? That builds in what Kristen said about leveraging those two or more people's abilities and resources they bring to the table. So this is another point that I really appreciated, because we talk a lot about teamwork, right? Everything's a team sport. One of my favorite T-shirts I saw soon after coming to Illinois 3 years ago, I passed a student that had on a T-shirt that said, "There is an I in my team." I like that a lot. And it was the block I, so she was ahead of her time. So teams are, here are some again, looking at a Harvard Business Review article. Here's how this particular author described the differences. Teams are created when managers need to work closely together to achieve a joint outcome. Their actions are interdependent, but they are fully committed to a single result. So that would be my principal gifts team, our principal gifts team at the foundation, right? We are working together. We are actually structured with our specific roles on that team to help our colleagues at all three universities advance gifts at that highest end of the pyramid, and looking at how we're doing that collectively. The gift planning team, they each have specific responsibilities to work together towards helping close and manage specially structured major gifts across our three universities. But collaborators face a different challenge. They will have some shared goals, but they'll also have competing goals. Also, the shared goal is usually only a small part of their responsibility, right? So that somewhat holds true in our case, right? But I know, like when I'm working with Bill, Bill's a good human being, and he's going to want ACES and Vet Med and engineering and LAS and everybody else to achieve their campaign goal. And he's going to want us to get to that $2.25 billion, if that's what it is, for Urbana. But what are you going to spend 98% of your time on?
Law.
Law, right? So being a university citizen is a part of Bill's responsibility. But his dean is really going to want to make sure that he's focused on law. So this is a little bit of our challenge. And I thought this graph, we're in academia, you have to have some kind of graph. I'm not quite sure how you would measure interdependence, but I'm sure there is a way to do that. So I always loved Dilbert. I don't know how they always capture workplace so well, but this is not really collaboration. I think this happens to us a lot of times, right? Like when we try to write case statements, that happens, everybody, contributes. So this is not collaboration. It might be teamwork, but I'm not sure about that either. All right. So our colleagues defined embracing collaboration as one of our values. Why? Why should we embrace collaboration? What do you think, Bill?
The strength of this university is the sum of its parts.
Strength of this university is the sum of its parts, certainly. Other thoughts? Yes?
The internal structure is more internal. Alumni recognize the University of Illinois Urbana Strength as one their alma mater. They think of law as their unit, but they still think of universities as a collective.
Right. They're proud of being affiliated with the University of Illinois, right? We hope. Other reasons? Well, one gets back to the definition we had before. It's more effective. If we collaborate, we're more likely to reach our overall goals than if we try to go at them alone. I mean, think about, besides just your unit, what if you were trying to do it all yourself? That goes back to Kristen's comment. We leverage individual and team strengths and help overcome weaknesses. I am good at a few things. There are thousands of things I'm not very good at, or that I may not be able to devote time to doing, right? So that's the other thing, is it also overcomes my weaknesses, and where our team may not, where we may be lacking in a skill. You know, if we're going to help develop messaging we're going to help develop, we're going to talk about this later, but when I'm working on a proposal for a donor, there's a lot of additional, I will often have content weaknesses because I'm not embedded in your colleges and units. I certainly have design weaknesses. If I want a designed proposal, that is, as you can tell from the slides. So I might need some help there, right? So that's another reason to collaborate. Synergy. What's synergy? Bill just said it in one way. What's synergy? The whole is greater than the sum of the parts, right? That's what makes, we were talking about that before, it's what makes our university great. Provides greater flexibility. When you think about what different people in different departments can bring to something, it gives you greater flexibility to shift and change your approach without having to stop, because you're only limited by what you or your team is bringing to the table. We talked about this a little bit. It ensures subject knowledge beyond an individual. So these are some of the things that that I particularly thought of in terms of what makes collaboration important. And it's a whole lot more fun. You learn from your colleagues, you learn from our faculty, you learn from our students. You have somebody to share the frustrations with, and laugh at some of the things that come up. So it's a lot more fun than doing it on your own. Okay, so here's just a little fun look at collaboration in action.
It's smarter to travel in groups.
So those are some pretty good examples of collaboration, maybe emergency collaboration. So my question is,
Oh.
oh, all right, it's all right. Perfect timing.
No, we'll wake it back up.
Okay, perfect timing. What are your examples of collaboration? That's all the next slide said. What are your examples of collaboration? Yes?
Working with
Ross.
a gift officer in another unit to bring in a gift for each unit from that household.
Fantastic. And what was the result of that?
Oh, we're going next week, so I'll let you know.
Okay, great. But and you're going together.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So 2 units. That'll do a lot more towards that overall campaign goal than if you were only talking about engineering or the other unit, right? Great. Anyone else? Yes?
Working with the Office of Corporate Relations to invite different corporate prospects to tailgate development.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's a good example of collaboration. Eva?
As Ross said, as regional people, we rely almost solely on collaboration because we have to rely on our unit development officers that we work with to figure out what's going on in their unit and then getting that message out. So even just communicating what's happening in
Yeah.
other units is collaborative.
That's key, right. Great. Alex is one big collaboration machine these days.
So
Right.
I think in our particular areas, when I think about in the OBCIA, these specifically around things like giving and stewardship and marketing, communication, that kind of stuff, I think, again, going back to what we were talking about with audiences, was an understanding of the fact that if we did that in silos, we'd be talking to the same people, but not in any way that was consistent or aligned, right? So at any point, you could have someone who would get a solicitation from annual giving, and it would look different. And then the next day they'd get a marketing piece, and that would look different. And then they might be a scholarship donor, and then the next day they'd get something that looked different, right? So a big
Right.
part of what we at least try to do, and Jamie's part of that, is to constantly work together.
Right.
To make sure that when we're talking to our audiences, that they know that it's us as Illinois, not different
Right,
voices.
right. Same, yes, Elizabeth.
I was gonna throw out in terms of Alex's team in marketing and communications too, I mean, like, even like the banners and, the way that, we look at creating like an inbound recruitment strategy, going back to your definition of collaboration, which I think is like such a good one, that their marketing and communications team, we don't expect them to be experts in recruitment, right? And that isn't really even part of their job. But yet they see that collaboration, even though it's a teeny piece, it's a huge piece for us.
Right.
And the fact that they understand the importance of the branding and the storytelling involving recruitment as well. That's, a huge example of collaboration. The fact that they're not like, well, I don't know why you want banners, or a brochure. So that again, I think is, just it's a testament to that marketing.
Right. So even thinking about some of the things that are happening around campaign readiness that Alex was talking about, besides the branding piece. So he was talking about reporting, right? So there's a whole group of techies somewhere 507 Green who are working to develop, actually there's many of them in testing phase now, but that suite of campaign reports, well, that takes a lot of talk with Alex and Rick Darnell and Jim Moore and Barry Benson and gift officers and people like Susan Lee, who's looking at metrics worldwide about what do those need to show? How far do we need to be able to drill down? How is that different from a regular pipeline report? Okay, here's one, let's test that. So let's get some volunteers together who will provide feedback on that. That's collaboration. The whole design of a new database, for those of you who were here while TED was being developed, a multi-year process, right? I see a few, we all get a little tick. And I did that at that M university. I was involved with the same kind of conversion there. So it's as painful a process everywhere. Huge collaboration, right? How are we prioritizing? You're not going to get everything everybody wants in design. So how do you prioritize that? What's most important when? What can we deal with later? All those kinds of things. So we collaborate every day. I mean, we really do. Even the most selfish of us, I think, probably collaborates every day. All right, so we're going to switch a little bit to talking about, I think a lot of what you've been spending time on is the life cycle of a donor relationship, right? So we're going to talk primarily about cultivation, a little bit about solicitation. So let's talk about cultivation, and in this I'm thinking major gift cultivation, working with a prospect to get them to a major gift or the next major gift. What happens? What do you do? What needs to happen in cultivation?
So you need to share that story that Alex was talking about earlier. You need to inspire, to some degree, even challenge the alumnus or alumni.
Right, okay, need to share a story, need to inspire the prospect. What else? What are some of the things that you might do to try to do that?
I think remaining consistent and like following up and staying in contact. And
Sure.
Following through.
Following through, okay.
This is kind of soft, but you do need to develop that personal rapport with somebody. I always ask, you know, and I say, Sherry, one of my main objectives today is to make sure that you'll see me again.
It's a great opening line. I am so stealing that. It really is. Yep. Other things, yes.
Possible bring back to campus, have them engage with faculty and students.
Have them engage with faculty and students, try to bring them back if they're not.
I was gonna say build their confidence, so whether they're already a donor or they see other donors, make sure then that builds people are being taken care of well and they're storing their money.
Exactly. So you're hitting on a lot of what I thought of, that getting acquainted, building rapport and trust. That's a big piece of it, right? Because we're not. What was the? I should have brought them. There were buttons I picked up at a conference recently at a vendor table, and it was something like liking someone on Facebook is not a cultivation strategy or something, right? It's not a cultivation move. I mean, it's that, and a lot of times we really do like these people that we're working with, right? The vast majority of the time. But we're not building friendships for ourselves, right? We're trying to get to a particular point. So that rapport has to be there. So we talked about inspiring them. So that's what I don't have somewhere on here. Imparting information and telling stories. Alex mentioned telling stories before. The best way to, there's all these studies that show people don't remember information, they remember stories. So yes, it's fantastic that we have one of the world's fastest supercomputers on this campus. It's a point of pride. What difference does that make? So when we can start talking about how that allows across all different kinds of disciplines to be able to get information and analyze information, and then we have this data visualization lab at NCSA that can then put that into something that makes communicating those results that much easier and that much better. And because of that, then we can figure out, we can crunch the numbers that can teach us how to do photosynthesis better so that we can feed a growing world on a warming planet. I'm not a scientist, but I got that part. That's what's cool. Discovering connections. So we want to engage them back, we want to bring them back to campus if we can. One of our challenges is that I love Champaign-Urbana, but one of our challenges is that we're in Champaign-Urbana. It's not the easiest place to get to for a busy person. So what are those connections that make them want to come back, and who can help us build that rapport and that interest? What's the goal of all of this? What's our goal when we're cultivating?
Get to an ask.
Absolutely. Not only an ask, a successful one, right? If any the gift officers in the room or anybody who has been in, I'm sure, I won't ask you to raise your hand, but I would definitely raise mine about how many of us have made bad asks. Oh. But sometimes it's because we really haven't done a good job of the cultivation. Sometimes it's just because we'll all make bad asks, but we want to get to a successful one. So if that's what's happening in cultivation, who or what do you need? If you're the lead in, in a relationship or figuring out the strategy to move a donor forward, what do you need? Yes?
You need to know information, you need to know the stories behind what you're going to tell.
The stories behind what you're going to tell. That's really what I have first. I have to see. So you need some content experts, and the regionals in the room, and I really need the content experts. I'm not embedded in any one college. I even try to know some about what's happening at UIC in Springfield. My RAM is not good enough. So I'm going to be talking with those of you and your colleagues who are in the units if I'm leading the cultivation plan for someone, to find out, well, what's, this person This person is practicing in, corporate litigation. What's happening in that, Bill? Help me understand what's going on in that here. I mentioned before about connections. Who are the influencers for this person? So trying to find that out and maybe making a connection. Who are their friends who are engaged with the university? Who are some of their classmates? Former professors. That can be, those relationships with professors who were pivotal in an alumnus's experience or success is really great. Somebody said you're going to need information, useful information. I know everybody has a love-hate relationship with Theodore. Not Theo. We all love Theo. But, yeah. Have a bran muffin. But there's a lot of information in TED. There's a lot of information in TED, and it's up to us to keep it good too. But, so that's one resource, right? When were they here? Who were their classmates? What fraternity or sorority might they have been in? What have they given before? What other contacts? We have a lot of turnover in advancement staff. And so what happened before? Our research analysts, they can be hugely helpful in updating information about their career, what boards did they serve on, where else did they give, is our wealth ratings the best that we can come up with. Those are never perfect, right? Because they're based on what we can find publicly, but is the GG&A rating accurate? The World Wide Web, Google is all of our friends, right? Just be careful about what those sources are. And then, and our colleagues who can help us think about a new approach or help us get some of that information that we might need. Yes?
I'm not sure it's going to be up there, but also I think it's important to make sure you have the decision maker present.
Excellent. So say what you mean about that a little bit.
A lot of times whenever we deal with couples, married couples or partners, you can be sitting with somebody and that's there to make that decision or financial decision. So if you sit with somebody, you get through, you build this rapport, and you don't know that they actually are the ones that are going to have to say yes or no, then it's important to get the person that will be able to say yes or no. So obviously if you could have group meetings or meetings with both parties or having both campus, that's
an excellent point. In my career, the time I've been in higher education, I've been at 3 universities, and that's something that I think we can always, everywhere I've been, as a group we can do better at, is we tend to focus on the alumnus, the one, if it's not a dual degree couple or a dual couple, if there is a couple there, without asking the question, and without at least trying to engage the spouse or partner so that that person is supportive of an investment here, if not actively. It's interesting, I was visiting with a couple last week. They met as undergrads at another university. He has a master's degree here. His wife has a master's degree from Michigan. But they're both definitely Illini. She's really not that interested in supporting Michigan anymore, and they've sort of navigated away from their undergraduate college, which I find interesting because those are often, where the rah-rah kind of allegiances are, and they met there. And they've been married 47 years, so I don't think that's, that's part of the problem. But anyway, so they're both definitely decision makers, and I think because she's been involved more than she has with their undergraduate college or her master's degree school, she's just more involved. Then you're also going to need materials, right, at some point, whether they're electronic or written, to help tell those stories we were talking about, to help inspire, thinking about, so where are we looking to make a difference in that thing that's important to you? We have a lot of, poor Eva probably hears this a lot. We have a lot of our alumni are like, they're still fans, but oh, for goodness, I'm tired of us not being at the top of the Big Ten in football or men's basketball. And So, okay, so what do we need to do to get there? And here's how you can help us get there. So we need things to be able, so like I said, I need some help. I'm a fairly decent writer, but I'm not a designer, and I sometimes need somebody to take my writing and make it better for this particular prospect or for this particular purpose. So we certainly need, and if it's anything electronic, once again, as you can tell, like I couldn't navigate between my presentation and the web. What about if it's repeat donors? I mean, a lot of us, that's what we're doing, right? We're going to somebody who made a gift before and we're asking for the next one and a bigger one. So we need all those things we talked about before. What else? What else do you need?
Update them on the impact of the gift, the previous.
Thank you. Update them. If I didn't know how my last gift made a difference, why would I bother to give again? And as a matter of fact, research, have any of you read anything by Penelope Burke, Donor-Centered Fundraising? She says they survey every year, they survey, and I'm going to forget the exact numbers. So see, I remember stories, I don't remember numbers as well. But it's something like 65% of donors who make their first gift to an institution, this is a nonprofit of any kind, 65% never make a second gift. And there are 3 primary reasons why. And every year when they do this survey, it's the same basic 3 things. Do you know what those are? Guesses? What? The umbrella is poor stewardship. They weren't thanked by the appropriate person in a reasonable period of time. They don't know, they were never told or ensured that the money was used for what they were told it would be used for. So keep in mind, this may not be a gift with a fund agreement that has a particular purpose, but I said that if you gave $100, it would go towards relief in Texas after this horrible storm. But I never heard of how that made a difference. And then the third is that they're asked too often. And that wasn't so much about frequency as it was related to point number 2, which is you asked before you showed me how my last gift had the impact you told me it would have. So I just think there's huge lessons for all of us in that. So absolutely. How has the gift been used? And so you're certainly going to need some help there, right? Jamie spends all of her time here, right? How do our scholarship gifts make a difference? And you may need lots of other departments. What else do you need? Well, most of this really falls into the stewardship piece, and somebody said impact. One of the first things that I try to find out from existing donors and working with Jamie and with business offices is, was the money used? It's frightening how many times you'll find out that it wasn't. So how was it used? Is there a balance remaining? Why? There may be a very good reason. It may actually give you a way to engage that donor in rethinking some of the specifics about how that gift might be used. And then most importantly, how has it made a difference? And reminding them of that. And one of the things that we're looking at, and I know that Erin Kirby on my team has been talking with Alex about, is like donors who have given not only large amounts but over a period of time and maybe to multiple units, is how do we show them the collective impact of their gifts? And for some of those key donors at the top of the pyramid for the campaign, we're working out a schedule and a method and a process of collaboration to do that well. And then lastly, have there been any problems? You need to know that. Problems with their gift, they're still unhappy about the chief. They were solicited badly before. They they weren't happy with the selection of the dean for your college. Because to get to that good ask, you need to know what are the sensitivities, and are there things that we can work with, and sometimes there are things we can't. But most of them we can. But if you don't know what they are, then you're going to step in it. I've done that one too, especially being new at an institution. Questions, other thoughts? What did I miss? You need more coffee? Do I need another movie?
I'm curious, Sherry, asking the NGOs in the room, how, when you go to make a visit to someone who is a repeat donor, how often do you connect with your stewardship staff and gift admin and to gather all this information before you actually go? Is that a pretty standard practice for those of you who are gift officers in the room?
And if there are people that have not been stewarded properly, so our department, we're not doing a very good job with our fellowship donors, for example. So we have at least like 9 different fellowships that still have donors that are alive. If you're seeing them, then we take a bag of letters. Like, these are all the people who've been awarded the fellowship. We should be doing this every year. We're working on that now. But trying to do that damage control when we go to the visit. If there are people who are already going, some things I've done in the past is just print the LinkedIn profile of one of the students that got it. Hey, by the way, here's some more information about it. Instead of like a full-fledged stewardship, it's just something from my end. Because sometimes working with students is like, I mean, they don't check their online email, so they never hear from us in that way. So maybe doing a little bit more personalized that way, or take a picture of them and put it in a frame and then give it to them or something.
Jamie, any FERPA concerns there? I'm just thinking.
No,
Because it's
so
public.
this is public.
Yeah.
That's true if it's a LinkedIn profile, it's
LinkedIn
public.
profile's public.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. But that's a really good question. I know one of the things, so in the principal gift level, when we convene groups, prospect teams to discuss prospect strategy, Erin Kirby, who's Director of Stewardship for Principal Gifts, many of you know her, she was in engineering before, she's a fantastic member of my team. One of the things she does is, okay, we're going to be talking about these 4 prospects today, is she looks at what have they given, and she goes in and looks at the fund. And part of that conversation will be, okay, there's a pretty significant fund balance. Is there an issue? Or there's not a stewardship plan in place for the gifts they've done. So maybe, separately, let's talk about what that plan should be, and I'm glad to help in any way. So that's the luxury of having someone focused on stewardship. And I realize not everyone has that, but it's a really good question.
When I first started working in stewardship, I remember there was a time when the vice chancellor then said, hey, I'm having lunch with a prospect tomorrow, someone fairly well known, and certainly I knew by name. They'd been having all the principal gift meetings, and there'd been all these conversations, and so the day before, I get this question, and can you give me an update on where all these things are with, his scholarships across campus, right? And part of the reason why he was going to have lunch was to set up the next ask. I mean, obviously not just from a cultivation standpoint, but really it was like getting close to that ask. And so I started digging into it, and it was like Pandora's box. I mean,
yeah. Oh yeah.
And I'm like,
worms.
Yeah. Go on this visit. I don't even know how to, right? But I was really at that point really struck by the fact that there had been all of this conversation and planning around who was the right person to go see him, and all these other things about what has he been doing the last year, and all these points of engagement. But then honestly, the question of like what have we been doing with his previous gifts was almost an afterthought. I mean, it really was just the last thing that, and it was almost offhanded. I mean, it was almost an offhanded question. Hey,
right.
Can you just look this up for me? So I am, as you are probably very well aware, very partial to stewardship and donor relations, right? But it's because I think if we were doing a better job of ensuring that we were doing better stewardship and donor relations, it would make the work of the NGOs much easier and much better, right? So it is part of the cultivation, I would argue, particularly for repeat donors. That is really laying the foundation, because you're starting with a foot in the hole if you know that the first thing you have to do, Nishant, when you go to see that person is to like work around all of the problems, right? Yeah, damage control, right? That's the first thing you're doing. That's not where you want to be, right?
Yeah.
So just encouraging all of you I would say that as you progress in your respective advancement careers and get to the point where you get to be decision makers and investing resources,
which is always the
invest in
challenge.
there a lot more than most advancement operations do. Because I think if you had that part of the operation running really smoothly, I think it would have an exponential impact on the ask side of the house as well.
Right.
So,
Well stated. One of my former colleagues defined stewardship as the bridge between the last gift and the next one. And I mean, to that point, the most important thing we can do to raise money is use the gifts that have been given for the purpose that they gave them to us, and hopefully communicate with them, with donors, and we've done that, but that's the most important thing. So really well put. So really, having your ducks in a row, it's important for any of our work all the time, but particularly for repeat donors. Yes,
Just
Kristen?
to say something from a stewardship perspective, I think sometimes it's easier to get caught up on the more systematic side. So like the gift acknowledgement and lower levels. I know even for something as simple as acknowledgement, as soon as it's a higher level, there's going to be a delay because then I have to wait and say, okay, wait, does this mean
Yeah,
department
who needs to?
signature or a team signature, and then it's, then we have to wait and send a draft and have a draft approved. So honestly, sometimes the lower level donors, I think, end up getting better stewardship because they're part of the
System.
process. So just as an encouragement to NGOs, like if you bond your stewardship person about a certain donor, never be afraid to do that because I think
Yeah.
it helps sometimes be like, oh yeah, we need to.
Right.
I mean, not that, and I'm not in any way trying to pass off that responsibility, but.
Sure.
That
Well, but
communication is really good to have.
right, right, absolutely. Okay. So then we move into solicitation. Okay, you've cultivated, you've been going through this process, moving them along, involving the right people. They're engaged, they're ready to talk about a specific investment. What happens there? What happens in the solicitation phase? What do you have to do? What's one of the first things you have to do? What are you going to ask? Right? I mean, the first thing is, how much are we going to ask them for? What's that ask amount that, that is a stretch maybe, but not too big of a stretch? All of us who have done major gift work have had that moment where I'm asking you to consider a gift of $1 million over 5 years. And I've gotten both of the, I would never give that much. And the, okay, like, that was it? I clearly should have asked for more, So determining the ask amount. So who do you need to talk to figure that part out? Who's involved in that decision? Or what resources might you need?
Well, I definitely use
Ross?
our research team to kind of help hone in on maybe not a specific ask amount, but hone in on maybe a bubble,
Yeah.
where a range might be.
Yeah. Is that what's their giving capacity based on what we know? Where else have they given? I mentioned that earlier, but that's it. Is this going to be like their biggest gift ever? That may be good, but is it 10 times what they've given any place else where they've been on the board? Maybe it's a stretch. What else? The prospect interest. I mean, a lot of what you're determining in that cultivation stage is what's going to be the right ask, what's the what, right? What's the what? Is it scholarships? Are they particularly interested in student support? Is it even your unit? Back to something we talked about before, in which case you're probably not the one doing the ask if that's been determined that it's not. Is it, Is it defined to a particular program within your college or your unit? Or is it broad? I mean, I actually was talking with someone who is talking about unrestricted giving for a dean. I'm like, oh, thank you. But there aren't that many people giving at major gift level that will be that unrestricted, right? We want to help them keep it as broad as possible. But then again, the what. So there's a lot of collaboration we need in determining the what. For one thing, we want to make sure that it is a gift that is spent for the purpose intended, right? So I realize that a lot of the problems we have with some of these gifts that haven't been spent is we probably did a pretty poor job of gift acceptance, right? We made the donor happy, but it's really not fulfilling any particular need that we have. So we want to be able to refine the ask in a way that it's something the donor is excited about and really advances an objective for our units. So we often need faculty involvement, sometimes deans. I think I have managers. So, before many of us, before we're actually going out with that ask, unless it's a fairly generic scholarship fund, faculty fund, or for, we know it's for a capital project, somebody wants to support the football initiative, we may need to talk to our bosses as well to make sure that it's going to be a fit. What do I mean by natural partners?
Who are some of the cool kids with whom they identify?
Yeah, right. Who are some of their friends, their peers, their other influencers like financial advisors? Now, we have to respect confidentiality, as do particularly their financial advisors, et cetera. But they might help us have some insights about what's really going to be of interest to them. Our campaign volunteers. I don't know how many of your units are putting together volunteer committees, but hopefully the people you're having on those committees are connected, right? So they can help with that. They can also help get them ready for the ask. Hopefully you're talking with the prospect or somewhere up before this point about what they would want to invest in. What difference would you like to make? You've talked about those campaign buckets, those themes, right? A university of distinction, and hearing where that resonates. Okay.
Sure, I'd add to that. I think you want those two things, the what and the how much, to align with each other.
Good point.
And that seems self-evident. And I think with some things like scholarships, you can make that amount whatever it is because there's always enough students to give money to. But I was recently, I wasn't involved directly in it, but was made aware of it, at least through my team, of a principal gift proposal that was being put together, in which there was a determined ask amount, and they had figured out what they wanted to propose, but actually those two numbers didn't really align with each other. By the time that they broke down what they wanted to ask for, there was still $3 million of kind of unaccounted in the budget, right? And this Jerry wasn't involved, so that's.
I'm saying who is this?
No. And I don't think.
Oh my God.
In fact, I don't think the proposal ever went forward. So I don't that. But I'm talking about the planning and the preparation standpoint, right? It certainly is important to make sure that you're finding the right ask amount, not too little, not too much, right? The Goldilocks rule. But at the same time, you want to make sure that if you're asking for 10 million, that you know how you're going to use that 10 million, right? And not just, well, we want to ask for 10 because we know they can give 10,
right?
But we can only come up with 7, right, as a means of how we're going to spend this, right? And then just kind of putting that into a bucket. So just another thing.
It's a really good point, yeah. Because the bigger the ask, the more you're going to have to justify every dollar, and it doesn't matter how wealthy someone is to that point.
Right.
Yes, we have very successful alumni who can easily make a $5 million gift or a $10 million gift. It's still a lot of money, and they could do something else with it. So what else happens at solicitation? Alex just brought up a really good point. Drafting a proposal. This- I mean, you know, what is, I'm trying to think of the expression. You know, that like, people never want to see how the sausage is made, the things you don't do in public. Well, the things you don't only do at your desk and at your computer is draft a proposal by yourself, because I have seen some of those. From some great gift officers who are good colleagues, but I'm like, oh my God, did you ask if there's any way to steward this? So to Alex's point too, involve your stewardship people. Involve them at this stage, involve them earlier, you know, as you. So, I mean, who are you going to need? You're definitely going to need, depending on the level of the gift and how specific the proposal is. If you need a proposal, if you really need a proposal, then you probably are doing something beyond a, would you give us $1 million to create an endowed scholarship fund for history, right? If you're really doing a proposal, you're probably coming up with something a little bit more specific. You need a good writer. Please use a good writer and use an editor and have someone who has never seen it before proofread the final copy. Sounds elementary, right? Once again, I have seen things go to donors that scared me. We're an institution of higher learning. If grammar and punctuation is not your strong suit, give it to someone who that is their strong suit. Policies, you know, we were talking about campaign counting before. So we need to know what the policies are around what gifts will count in the campaign. And there are those policies are out there on UIF online. So if you haven't taken a look, take a look. It is pretty broad. I mean, most things count, but for instance, if they're going to need to pay in over a longer period than 5 years, you're going to need to get that approved. Those kinds of things. If they want to give, what if they want to give an unusual asset? Can we accept that? What do we need to do? When that's the question, call gift planning and trust services. They can help you with that. So those kinds of things. FERPA, I brought that up before we're telling them all the things that they're going to be able to know about and do with their students, right, Alex? Right, Jamie? Jamie's a great resource on what can we disclose and can we not disclose, and what's good, not only legal and policy, but good practice for a number of reasons.
And just another plug, I feel like stewardship is hijacking this, but that makes me excited.
Okay.
But if you need any data points, like right now I'm working with engineering, we have a donor who wants to give specifically to 3 counties. Great. How many students do we get from those 3 counties? How many actually apply to the College of Engineering, and how many actually are admitted to engineering? That dwindles the numbers down, and you know, as Alex mentioned, we always have money for scholarships. Yeah, but sometimes the restrictions are so specific that we have a great gift that can only go to one student.
Right.
And that student chose not to enroll here. So
Yeah.
keep that in mind. If you need data points, let me know. I can run some things for you.
Yeah. And to try to preference rather than, and even those as broad as possible, right? Yeah. Yeah, when I was a long time ago, I was at the University of Cincinnati, and they have a very strong Greek community in Cincinnati, and there was a donor there before I was there. I ended up being the prospect manager. Their scholarship was not only for students from Greece, but from particular towns in Greece. So we were working hard to try to broaden those restrictions a little bit. Because needless to say, some years had gone by that their fund wasn't used. And then their bequest, which was significant, was going to make that fund bigger so it could do some real good. But anyway, that's what we're trying at, right? Proposing the how. I'm going to move a little bit more quickly because of time. But what's the possible gift structure, right? Is it a one-time gift? Is it a multi-year pledge? Is there a planned gift in there? Is it maybe a combination? I always talk about the how. So again, that's where you really need to collaborate. And I'm going to make a plug for our gift planning and trust services team. But they can be great partners for you because not only are they a lot of people think when you talk about gift planning that you're talking about bequests and charitable remainder trusts and some of these other tools that help people make larger gifts than they otherwise thought they can. And that's very true. And many of which mean that the funds don't actually come to your program until some point in the future. But they can also help. They stay up to date on tax law, and they understand the implications of giving different kind of assets. So, what might help a donor get to yes? Maybe it's using appreciated securities instead of cash. They're telling you that they're working on a succession plan for their business. What might that mean about how they want to structure their gift? They're asking, you've learned by working with them in the cultivation stage what kind of assets they might have. So maybe they have, I love these. You go into someone's home for the first time, and I mean, I've had this happen. I enjoy art. I don't know a lot about it. I walked into someone's home, and I recognized some of the artists. And these were not prints. So, what kind of assets do they have? How might that influence what and when and how they give? So help craft the best ask. And then again, considerations regarding the use of the gift, which Jamie brought up quite well. Other things that happen at solicitation that I might not have thought of. Tony.
It's kind of simple and reductive, but also I think I like to practice the actual ask itself. So I think about the language that I was provided, whether it's courage or once in a lifetime or inspirational. And I actually, not that I have it memorized or have an elevator speech, but I run it through my head a few times and make sure that if we're sitting in a restaurant, that we're in a private space, that, this waiter or server is not going to come and interrupt us while we're having this important conversation. I might get there a few minutes early and ask for, a 10-minute window after our drinks are delivered. I think it's important for us to prepare that so we're less nervous, because there's going to be nerves anyway.
Yeah.
And they're going to be nervous and we're going to be nervous, so it's up to us to kind of plow through that and have some sort of polish and muscle.
Yeah. Well, and there's even a collaboration or at least a teamwork opportunity there. I have sometimes, I'm going to back up a minute. First, even just yourself, you want to consider where's the best place with that donor to make an ask. Sometimes it's a more private place than a restaurant. Sometimes a restaurant's okay. It depends on the person and the restaurant, right? But to that point, for that or other reasons, I've also called on my regional colleagues before when I'm meeting with somebody in another city. What would be, it needs to be fairly close to this, but someplace that's not too noisy or that's accessible, what do you recommend, right? So, I don't know New York City that well. And there's a lot of great places to eat. So, yeah.
What about kind of preparing the prospect for what you're going to talk about? Would you consider, when you're setting all this up, and I'd like to continue the discussion we've been having about this and maybe see where things might be right now.
Right. That's a great point. Yeah, it shouldn't be a surprise that you're going to make an ask. Right.
And what are you going to do if they provide any objections or possibly?
Yeah. Planning is really good. Okay. All right. So then you're going to close that gift, right? So what happens at the point of closing the gift? Okay, so you've solicited them. There's an ask outstanding. They may have a proposal, depending on the type of gift. What happens? How do you get to closure? How do you get to the handshake? There may be some negotiation, right? It may be around amount. It may be around restrictions. It may be around timing. So it's the same, right? You got to go back to those folks who can help. They want to tweak the purpose a little bit. Well, unless it's really simple, you may need to go back and talk to your faculty or to Jamie or to find out if or whoever administers the scholarships in your unit, if that would work. When they say yes, you're going to need, probably if it's a major gift, you're going to need some kind of gift documentation. So you're going to want to work with a whole variety of people. Gift planning and trust services, that's who coordinates drafting gift documentation, right? Your own unit administration around administering that gift and how that's going to happen. Gift processing may be involved, particularly depending on what kind of assets they're going to give. You may need to give them a heads up or talk with them about how would we receipt those gifts. Gift administration, there's going to be a fund to set up, there's going to be money to transfer, so they're part of that. Possibly the donor's attorney, particularly around if it's a planned gift or an estate gift of some sort, or they're going to be giving real estate or some kind of unusual asset where the donor may need to have a document drafted by his or her advisor. So you're going to get to gift documentation, and we're going to receive actual money stuff. So we have to be prepared to do that. We're pretty well set up to do that, but again, depending on the assets, there may need to be other people involved. More, in this campaign, I hope we see a lot of gifts of appreciated securities, because if people are giving at their capacity, there's a lot of smart reasons to give appreciated assets if that's what they have, and so their broker may need to be involved, and their broker's going to need instructions on how to do that. All that kind of sounds basic, but again, remembering why so many people are involved. And last, but certainly not least, stewardship gets involved even more so at that point. So are we prepared to steward that gift when it comes in? And remember that now we have the capacity within TED to set up stewardship plans so that you get those pesky little reminders if you're responsible for doing something. Okay, questions about that or thoughts about things that I didn't do? So I get tired of the cliche that fundraising is a team sport, but it really is. For us to be successful, we all need each other. So, you got peanut butter in my chocolate. Anybody else remember those commercials? Anybody old enough? Thank you. You got chocolate in my. So this goes back to some of those earlier comments actually when Alex was presenting. So this is another, I'm going to talk about collaboration a little bit on the softer side, is our donors have broad areas of interest, right? So in that cultivation phase, we might find out that even though this person is, they graduated from ECE, they have 3 degrees related to that field, and they're prominent in industry, but they're on the board of the, St. Louis Symphony Orchestra, and they sing in a chamber choir, and they might not know, because they were so focused when they were here, the incredible things we have going on in the School of Music and at the Krannert Center, right? Sometimes their philanthropic priorities are a surprise. The donor who does mission work in Haiti every year. So thinking about that, how can we help maximize their philanthropy? There was a vice president for development I worked for earlier who used to say, I don't want just some of our donors' philanthropic dollars, I want all of them. Now that might be a little greedy, but his point was, great research university, just about anything, and this is so true here, just about anything that donor's interested in, we have it happening with excellence here. So I think that's something great that we can bring to our donors and prospects. So I just wanted to share, this is by no means representative of everyone, but in part of this campaign preparation, Martz and Lundy has done some campaign interviews with some donors and prospects, primarily those who have given or have the capacity to give at a 7-figure level. And we have also been doing the same interviews with most members of the foundation board, and some of us on the senior team at the foundation have been doing those. So I just wanted to share something to think about in collaboration that came from some of the feedback we've gotten before. These are a few of the comments that we've had in one way or another from a few of our top donors and prospects. This is certainly not representative of everybody's experience or of all of us, but these are some people's experiences. So it's another reason to think about, to get a little bit, I know, Bill's got to raise money for the law school, and Tony's got to raise money for LAS, particularly in some, specific departments, and that's his focus, and it should be, and that's how we're all going to be successful. But we're hearing some of this from some of our people, so we're not looking at them as whole people. So if they're an iFund donor and an LAS donor, how do we talk to the whole part donor? I would also remind us that a rewarding investment, well stewarded, that has impact, leads to another one. So I'm not very good at sports analogies, but this particular gift may only be the first inning. In my experience in fundraising, I have never seen a donor give less to one unit if their gift was well used and well stewarded because they gave to another unit. And I've heard the same thing from people who've been doing this a lot longer and a lot better than I have. So we're running out of time. So real quickly, I'm just going to go through a few quick things about what makes collaboration difficult, right? You all know this. Are there any I missed? Probably a number of them, right? So being aware of this, I probably need to go back to this list sometime and think about how am I contributing to that. But I think that is. So goals and performance metrics may or may not support collaboration, right? I think we're trying to get better at that. But I also think, I know at least at the top level, you all have pretty good managers. And I think they understand what needs to happen for us to be successful. So your metrics are part of it, and they're an important part of it. They're not the only part of it. So these are some of my ideas about how we can truly embrace collaboration. Some of it is what you're doing now and what I think Theo and Elizabeth help us do so well, which is looking at ways that we can learn together and interact, and get us out of our day-to-day routine to do that. Ask lots of questions, not just in these settings. Know thyself. Self-awareness is huge, and I think it's probably something I know that in Leading Forward, it's part of the curriculum, but Elizabeth has some great resources on building self-awareness. Think about how we recognize team achievements. We do that a lot at the out in front and the quarterly all-staff meetings, but I remember one of my colleagues when I was at that M school, in their department, I remember calling and I'm saying, so how are you? It's great, we're doing the money dance over here. They had this little tradition when they closed a major gift. It was a silly little thing, but they celebrated. Okay. And again, from another resource, I love this quote: "For collaborative cultures to flourish, transparent and context-rich communication is essential." Transparent and context-rich. This becomes more crucial the bigger or more complex your organization is. Think we're a little complex? Even if it was just the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, without adding in the foundation, the Alumni Association, our sister universities. It was a great question you asked earlier, Ross. But 17 colleges and Division I athletics and lots, these fantastic interdisciplinary institutes and performing arts organizations. And transparent and context-rich communication. I'm going to try to keep that in mind. And then thinking about what you need, what do we need in our environment to support collaboration? And I hope we have trust, and I hope we have shared ownership. We certainly have the diversity. Skills, experience, kinds of places we've worked, life experiences, skills, writers, designers, great interpersonal skills, great research skills. So hopefully we have the right tools. Did I miss any others? So that's it. We're almost at the end, but I am glad to take questions, or if you have examples or experiences you want to share, challenges that we should work on together. What's on your mind besides lunch?
I appreciated what you said about that metrics may not be lined up for collaboration or for rewarding collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about that just from what's on your plate, and then rolling all the way up to, right, this gift is for both of us, and so how will we provide that? So I just wonder if you have any thoughts about negotiating that from the bottom up instead of from the top down.
Well, I think having those honest conversations with your manager to start with. And I always think it's good in any one of those conversations to start with, what do I recognize I could do differently or think differently? I try to remember that as I'm going in to talk to Jim Moore, who's my boss, about something that I may want to, a change I might want to influence. So that's one. The other is, I think we need to remember that our primary responsibility as a team is to get people more engaged and to raise money. And when we talk about the campaign, there's a lot of things we want to happen because of the campaign, but we need to reach that goal. So it does mean sometimes we have to prioritize some things differently because we don't have unlimited resources, and I've never worked anywhere that did. So it's sort of recognizing those things and maybe have some specific suggestions for what might be different or added to the metrics that would support collaboration. And there's some models out there. So, but I think that's part of it. And I would say, I'm a believer in performance metrics. I mean, I think there's a reason to have specific things that are measured, that are objective about job performance. There's also those things that are subjective. I would also remind you that and I don't know all of your metrics inside and out because it's a different management reporting structure, but if you're on the major gift side or the leadership annual gift or stewardship piece, on those plans, there's various roles that staff may have on a plan. How does that feed into your metrics? Because you may not be the plan manager, but you may be a secondary solicitor. And this example Ross was talking about with another unit, I don't know if that's one plan or two plans. If it's one ask, it's probably one plan, right? So, but you're both getting credit, right, for those that ask. So there are some ways that support collaboration in our system. But it's a good question. Did that answer it?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. Others? Great. All right. Well, thank you for spending your whole morning. Great to be with all of you.